It was the day before Christmas, and I was already halfway through the road trip with my daughter, Mia, when my phone rang. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. My mom. My stomach tightened instantly. I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I'd been trying to convince myself that this time would be different, that this Christmas would be the one where everything worked out. But the sinking feeling in my gut told me I was just setting myself up for disappointment. I answered the phone, forcing myself to keep my voice neutral, even though my heart was racing. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep the tension from my voice. "Hi, Maria." My mom's voice came through. Sweet and controlled, almost too controlled, like she was trying to stay calm, but there was something underneath it I couldn't quite place. "Listen, I need to talk to you about something." I glanced over at Mia, sitting in the back seat, her face lit up by the soft afternoon sun. She was humming quietly, completely oblivious to the conversation unfolding. Her excitement was palpable, and I couldn't help but smile. This Christmas was supposed to be special for her. She'd been talking about it for weeks, counting down the days. Mia had been so excited to see her grandparents, and in my mind, I kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, this year they would finally treat us like we mattered. I knew that Mia didn't completely understand the weight of the situation, but I'd been holding out hope that this time would be different, that we wouldn't be dismissed or overlooked like we had been so many times before. But then my mom's next words shattered all of that hope. "We were talking," she continued, her tone suddenly sharp, almost rehearsed. "And we've decided it's best if you don't come this year." I froze. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and for a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood. But no, the words were clear. She didn't want us there. Not me, and certainly not Mia. I forced myself to keep driving, my mind spinning as I tried to process the coldness in her voice. "What?" I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "What do you mean?" "We just think Mia is a bit too much sometimes," she said, her voice dropping lower, like she was saying something insignificant. "She can be a lot, and it's stressing everyone out. We've got guests coming, and it's just easier this way." I felt my face go hot. This couldn't be happening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was on my way to spend Christmas with the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally, but instead, I was being told my daughter wasn't welcome. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Mom, I'm literally on my way," I said, my voice rising without meaning to. "We're almost there." "I'm sorry," she cut me off, her tone no longer caring. "But it's for the best. We'll catch up some other time." I could feel the tears welling up, but I couldn't let them fall. Not now, not in front of Mia. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces, but I didn't have time to process it. I had to keep it together. For her. My mom ended the call just like that, without a second thought. I stared at the screen, feeling completely numb. Mia, still oblivious, continued humming in the back seat, her little voice so full of joy. I had no idea how to explain this to her. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to gather myself, but it felt like the weight of my mother's words was still crushing me. Mia didn't notice, still lost in her thoughts, her little fingers tapping on the window as she stared out at the passing landscape. I tried to calm my breathing, but it was hard. The sting of rejection wasn't something I could easily shake off. She had called Mia too much. How could a child be too much? How could a grandparent look at their own grandchild and see anything but love? The thought twisted something deep inside me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely alone. I forced my hands to relax on the steering wheel and took a slow, shaky breath. I had to focus. I couldn't let Mia see how much this hurt. I needed to keep the act up, just a little longer. I glanced in the rearview mirror at her again. Mia was humming now, her little stuffed fox cradled in her lap, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. She wasn't asking questions, but I knew that wouldn't last. She was a smart kid, and sooner or later she'd figure it out. She'd know that something wasn't right. "Mom?" Mia's voice was small, and the way she said it made my stomach drop all over again. She'd noticed something, the tension in the air. "What's wrong?" I didn't trust myself to speak right away. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her face in the mirror. She was staring at me now, looking at me with those big, trusting eyes. For a second, I wanted to say everything would be fine, that we'd still make it to Grandma's house and everything would be normal. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her, not anymore. Not after what had just happened. "Nothing, honey," I said, my voice soft, but it felt like a lie even as I said it. "Stay buckled, okay? I'll be right back." I pulled over onto the shoulder of the freeway, my car making a soft screech against the gravel as I slowed down. The world outside was still, the gray sky heavy with the kind of cold that always felt more like abandonment than anything else. I opened the door, letting the chill of the air rush in. It didn't do anything to cool the fire in my chest, but at least it gave me a moment to think, to try to wrap my head around what had just happened. I wanted to scream, to shout and make sense of the hurt, but there was nothing to be gained from that. Mia needed me to be calm. Mia needed me to be strong. So I stood there for a few minutes, hands on the hood of the car, taking in the silence, letting it settle over me like a blanket. The tears I hadn't let fall yet threatened to rise to the surface, but I held them back. I couldn't break in front of her. Not now. When I climbed back into the car, Mia was still sitting there, waiting for an explanation that I wasn't ready to give. She looked up at me, and I saw the question written across her face. She could feel the shift in the air, even if she didn't understand it fully. "Mom, can we still see Grandma and Grandpa?" Her voice was so innocent, so full of hope, that it made my heart ache. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I wanted to say something, anything, to make her feel like everything was going to be okay. But the truth was, I didn't know if it would be. I didn't know if there was a way to fix this. All I knew was that my daughter was never going to be too much. She deserved more than this. "We're going somewhere else for Christmas," I said, my voice steady now. I couldn't promise her everything would be perfect, but I could promise that I wouldn't let anyone make her feel like she wasn't wanted. I turned the car around, and Mia, still unsure, asked one more time, "But are we going to see Grandma?" I shook my head, but my words came out clear. We're going somewhere where we're loved. And somehow, that felt like enough. I drove in silence, the road stretching out before us as I tried to clear the fog in my mind. Mia was quieter than usual, her small voice only breaking the stillness when she asked if we could listen to her favorite song. I put on the music, but my mind wasn't on the lyrics. The hurt I felt over my mother's words wasn't something I could shake off easily. She had dismissed Mia so effortlessly, like my daughter wasn't worth the trouble, as if she wasn't worth the love. And it was more than just the hurt of hearing those words. It was the way they made me feel, like I wasn't enough either. All my life, I'd bent and twisted to fit into a mold they wanted me to fit, and still, it was never good enough. I glanced at Mia in the rearview mirror again. She was looking out the window, her hand pressed against the glass, watching the world pass by, seemingly lost in her thoughts. I could see the confusion on her face. She didn't understand what had happened, why we weren't going to Grandma's, but she knew something was wrong. That was the hardest part, the not being able to protect her from the pain that was caused by people who should love her unconditionally. The farther we drove, the more the weight of the situation settled on me. I had no idea where I was headed, but at least I knew it would be a place where we wouldn't be judged. We ended up in a small town on the outskirts of the city, and I pulled into a quiet parking lot outside a local cafe. I needed a moment to breathe, to gather myself, and maybe even to have a cup of coffee. The holidays were supposed to be about warmth, about family, but instead, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of expectations and rejection. "We here?" Mia asked, her voice still small, still unsure. I looked at her, trying to offer her a reassuring smile, though it felt like a lie. "Yeah, we're here. We're going to get something sweet, okay?" She perked up a little at the mention of sweets, and I couldn't help but feel a brief sense of relief. I didn't want her to carry the weight of what happened for too long. She deserved joy, even if I couldn't give it to her in the way I'd hoped. As we walked into the cafe, the warmth of the place hit me instantly, and I realized just how cold I'd been feeling inside. The smells of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon filled the air, and for a moment, I allowed myself to forget about the phone call. We ordered hot chocolate and pastries, and as Mia dipped her cinnamon roll into her drink, I noticed a woman at the table next to us. She was older, probably in her late 50s, and she smiled at me before looking at Mia. "Is that your daughter?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, surprised by the kindness in her tone. "Yeah, her name is Mia." "She's lovely," the woman said, her smile warm. "You've got a good kid there." I smiled back, the compliment landing in a place I didn't realize was so starved for warmth. The woman didn't ask questions or try to pry into our story. She just offered a simple acknowledgement that felt like more than anything my family had given me in years. I realized then that it wasn't just about the holidays. It was about finding people who could see me and Mia, truly see us, without any judgment or expectation. I spent the next few hours with Mia at the cafe, watching her play with the sugar packets and making small talk with the kind woman who sat across from us. She didn't know what had just happened, but in that moment, her presence felt like a balm to the rawness I was feeling. When we finally left, Mia was smiling, her little hand wrapped around mine as we walked back to the car. As we pulled away from the cafe, I couldn't help but think of what had happened back home, how my family had turned their backs on us, but it wasn't as painful anymore. I had learned something important today, that love, real love, wasn't about who shared your blood or who showed up when it was convenient. Love was about the people who made space for you, who welcomed you without hesitation. We were going to be okay. I would make sure of it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Mia humming softly as she played with the toys she'd brought along. I had no idea what time it was, but I didn't really care. The weight of yesterday's events hadn't gone away, but I was determined to make today better, to show Mia that not all people treated us the way my parents had. I glanced around the small living room we were staying in at Claire's, the space cozy and filled with the faint smell of coffee. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a safe place, something I hadn't realized I'd been craving until we arrived here. Mia was sitting on the couch, her stuffed fox by her side, flipping through a book. She looked up at me, her big eyes full of curiosity. "Mom, are we going to see Grandma today?" I took a deep breath, my chest tightening at the mention of my mother. It had been a struggle to keep things light, but I wasn't about to lie to her anymore. I knelt down in front of her, keeping my voice calm, even though my insides were anything but. "Sweetheart," I began, "Grandma and Grandpa are not able to see us right now." Her face fell slightly, a trace of confusion flickering across her features. "But why?" I hesitated, unsure how much to explain. How much could I share with her without burdening her with too much at once? "Sometimes people don't treat others very well, even when they should," I said, my voice catching slightly. "But that's not your fault. You are never the problem, Mia. Never." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. She was just a kid. She should be looking forward to playing with her cousins, not worrying about why her grandparents didn't want to see her. "Can we still have Christmas here?" she asked, a hopeful note in her voice. I smiled, brushing her hair back from her face. "We're going to make it special, I promise. Christmas is about love, and we have plenty of that here." Mia's face lit up at that. "You mean we can still have presents?" I chuckled softly. "Of course we can have presents, and cookies, and maybe some new traditions. Just you and me." She grinned, bouncing on the couch. "I love new traditions." I knew it was going to be hard, but I also knew this was what I had to do. I couldn't keep going back to people who made me feel less than, who made Mia feel like she wasn't worth their time. This wasn't the Christmas I had imagined, but it was a chance to redefine what the holiday meant for us. It wasn't about perfection. It was about us, about building something stronger than the rejection we'd faced. I was determined to make sure Mia didn't grow up thinking that love had to be earned, that her worth was up for debate. As we made breakfast together, I found myself smiling more than I had in a long time. It wasn't the festive spread I had hoped for, but the warmth in the room, the laughter between Mia and Claire's kids, felt like the closest thing to a family Christmas that I had experienced in years. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling me away from the moment. I didn't want to look at it. Part of me feared that it was another message from my mother, more guilt-tripping, more manipulation. But I picked it up anyway. It was a text from my aunt, Denise. "I heard what happened. I'm proud of you. Protect Ivy. You're doing the right thing." I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a lump form in my throat. I hadn't expected anyone to reach out, not after everything. But here it was, a simple message of support. My hand trembled slightly as I typed back, "Thank you." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was alone in this. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had made a decision yesterday, and today I was living it. No more hiding. No more pretending. I looked over at Mia, her face lighting up as she laughed with Claire's kids. She was happy. She was safe. And for the first time in ages, I felt like I was too. Maybe this wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but it was the one I needed. The days passed slowly, but there was something lighter about them. Mia and I settled into this new rhythm, one where we didn't have to walk on eggshells around people who were supposed to be our family. Instead, we spent our days enjoying small things, picking out Christmas lights, baking cookies, and even making paper snowflakes to hang around the house. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Claire and her family welcomed us with open arms, and Mia quickly formed a bond with her cousins, who were a little older but still made space for her in their world. Watching them all laugh together was a gift I didn't know I needed. I hadn't realized how much I missed the feeling of being included, of being valued without strings attached. One evening, as we sat around the table eating the dinner Claire had made, her infamous roast chicken that smelled like it belonged in a magazine, I found myself actually enjoying the conversation. It was easy to talk here, free of judgment or passive-aggressive comments. My sister was still distant at times, but she never outright rejected me, not like our parents had. She asked about Mia's school and listened when I talked about the new job I'd taken up. It felt like real connection, something I hadn't experienced in years. After dinner, as the kids were busy playing with their new toys, Claire and I sat down on the couch, the faint glow of the Christmas tree lights flickering in the corner. She looked at me carefully, like she was trying to gauge how I was really doing. "You're okay, right?" she asked, her voice soft but sincere. I hesitated, unsure if I should speak the truth, but I was tired of hiding, of pretending things didn't hurt when they did. "No," I said, my voice cracking just a little, "but I'm getting there. I don't think I've really been okay for a long time." She nodded, her face softening. "I know, I can see it, and I'm sorry for not being more supportive before. I should have noticed." The words were simple, but they landed heavy. I didn't need her to apologize for what had happened with our parents, but hearing her acknowledge it felt like a weight had lifted. She didn't have all the answers, but she was trying, and that was enough. Mia came running into the room, her arms full of coloring books and crayons, her face glowing with excitement. "Mom, can we draw together?" I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through me. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's make a masterpiece." We spent the next hour at the coffee table, coloring and chatting about whatever came to mind. Mia showed me her drawings, silly stick figure versions of us, of course, and asked me to make her one of the monsters she'd invented. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I felt whole, like I had what I needed right here. Later that evening, when the kids were tucked into bed, Claire and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets with cups of hot tea in hand. The air was cold, but the quiet was comforting. We didn't talk much, but it was enough to simply be there with each other. As I looked up at the stars, something inside me shifted. I wasn't sure where the road would take me, but I knew I wasn't going to keep chasing a place in a family that didn't want me. Mia and I were our own family now, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I glanced over at Claire. "Thanks," I said quietly, "for everything." She smiled, her eyes soft. "Anytime, Maria. We're family, no matter what." It was simple, but it was the truth. And that was the best kind of Christmas gift I could have asked for. The next few weeks blurred into each other, filled with a quiet kind of peace I hadn't realized I needed. Mia and I spent Christmas Eve in Claire's living room, our stockings hanging on the fireplace, and the sound of carols playing softly in the background. We didn't have the grand celebration I had once dreamed of, but there was something about this simple version of the holiday that felt right. Mia was happy, her laughter filling the house, her joy infectious. And that was enough. It had to be. I still hadn't heard from my parents. The silence was heavy, but I couldn't bring myself to care. They hadn't reached out after the phone call, and part of me had expected that. After all, they'd made their feelings clear. What I hadn't expected was that the silence, while painful, was also a kind of freedom. I was no longer tangled in their expectations or trapped by their indifference. The space was uncomfortable at first, but it also gave me the room to breathe, to heal. On Christmas morning, Mia woke up early, her excitement palpable. She rushed down the stairs to find the presents Claire had helped her wrap, her little face lighting up with each gift she unwrapped. It wasn't much, just a few toys and books, but the joy in her eyes made everything feel worthwhile. I watched her, my heart swelling with a love I had no words for. This was what mattered. This moment, this happiness. I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take it away. By the afternoon, we were sitting around the table, the three of us, Claire, her husband, and me, eating Christmas dinner. It wasn't the big, chaotic family dinner I had imagined, but it was warm, and it was ours. The conversation was light, easy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. I wasn't on the outside, looking in. I wasn't the problem or the disappointment. I was just me, and that was enough. As we ate, I found myself thinking about my parents. I had almost forgotten about them, almost moved on from the hurt they caused. But there it was again, that sharp pang of disappointment. They hadn't even tried to make amends. They hadn't called. They hadn't sent a message. Nothing. The message from my Aunt Denise had been the only sign of life from anyone in my family who seemed to care. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that not everyone was as cold or as distant as my parents. That evening, after Mia had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, reflecting on the past few weeks. I thought about the phone call, the rejection, the silence. I thought about the way my parents had treated me, and how that treatment had extended to Mia, how it had made me question my own worth for far too long. But now, sitting here in this warm house, surrounded by people who actually cared, I realized something important. I wasn't defined by my parents' approval or their rejection. I was defined by how I loved my daughter, how I built a life for us, how I chose to be better than the hurt they had tried to impose on me. I took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. I wasn't going to waste another minute on people who couldn't see my worth. I wasn't going to wait for them to apologize or make things right. I was done. As I looked over at the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling softly in the quiet room, I made a silent promise to myself. Mia and I would never be unwanted again. We would always find a place where we were loved, where we were enough. And maybe that was the most important lesson of all. That love wasn't something to be earned or begged for. It was something to be given freely, without conditions. And as long as Mia and I had each other, we had everything we needed. The world outside was cold, but inside, I knew we were home. The months that followed Christmas were a blur of quiet healing and subtle transformations. Mia and I had settled into a routine that felt comfortable, almost natural. Each day, I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. There were still moments when the ache of my parents' rejection hit me unexpectedly, but they were fewer now, easier to push aside. With every passing day, I grew stronger, more confident in the choices I had made, and more determined to create the kind of life I wanted for Mia and me, one that was filled with love, acceptance, and no room for toxic expectations. We spent a lot of time with Claire and her family, and it was easy to pretend that we were just like any other family. Mia flourished in the company of her cousins, and I found comfort in the simplicity of their quiet dinners and game nights. There was no drama, no tension, just people who genuinely cared about each other. It was a far cry from the constant push and pull of trying to gain approval from my own parents, and it felt like a small victory every time I realized that I was no longer chasing something I would never get. But there were still days when the silence from my parents felt like a weight I couldn't quite shake. I thought about them sometimes, wondered if they had thought about us, if they had regretted their words. I wanted to believe that they missed us, but a part of me knew that it wasn't just about regret. It was about something deeper, something more ingrained in the way they saw the world. And as much as it hurt, I finally accepted that it wasn't my responsibility to fix their broken view of me or of Mia. That was their burden to bear, not mine. One day, as I was driving home from work, my phone buzzed in my lap. I didn't look at it right away, not wanting to disrupt the quiet of the drive, but when it buzzed again, I couldn't ignore it. I pulled over to the side of the road and glanced at the screen. It was a message from my mom. "I think we should talk." I stared at the words, the familiar surge of anger and hurt rushing to the surface. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to continue on with the life I had built without their interference. Another part of me wanted to respond, to finally hear them admit what they had done and apologize. But as I sat there, with the engine running and the quiet around me, I realized something. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need their validation anymore. I deleted the message without replying, my finger hovering over the screen for a moment before I put my phone back in my pocket. It wasn't easy. There was a part of me that always wondered, always hoped, that one day things would change, that they would finally see how wrong they had been. But I had already seen the truth. They weren't going to change, not in the way I needed them to, and I had come to terms with that. When I got home, Mia was already running around, her voice carrying through the house as she played with a new toy. I smiled as I watched her, the sound of her laughter filling the space between us. In that moment, I realized how much I had gained by walking away from the hurt. I had my daughter. I had the love of people who truly saw us. And that was everything. Mia came running to me, her face lighting up. "Mom, guess what? I made a new drawing." "Let me see," I said, crouching down to meet her at eye level. She handed me a crayon-scribbled picture of a castle, complete with stick figure people holding hands. It was simple, but it was beautiful. And it was everything I needed to know that we were going to be okay. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me that I was enough. I already knew. Life can be messy, and sometimes people will let you down. But the real power lies in how you choose to move forward. Don't waste energy chasing approval from those who won't give it to you. Build your own table, fill it with love, and enjoy the company of those who appreciate you. And remember, it's okay to let go of toxic relationships. It's not drama, it's self-care. So, if you're tired of being the side character in someone else's story, join the Revenge Protocol family. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and let's build our own happy ending together.